What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Knicks Recap Podcast. You could be anywhere in the world this afternoon, but you chose to be here with me, and I really do appreciate that. As I said, I'm your host, Troy, and again, Knicks Nation, I see you. Chat gang, I see you as well, too. As you guys know, we have a ton of Knicks content to cover today. I'm talking about Julius Randle. Potentially, will he sign that contract extension? I am talking about the Knicks' potential trade targets. Will New York go small next season? There's so many different things to talk about. And when I was creating this episode and thinking about special guests, because we do have a special guest to get to, I was thinking about who should help me discuss all of these updates. When I was thinking about that, I was thinking about experience. And I was thinking about time put in. And I was thinking about 27 years about covering and writing for the NBA. And in my personal opinion, is one of the best to ever do this. Please help me welcome senior NBA writer for The Ringer. You can also catch him every Monday on the Real Ones podcast, the amazing, legendary Howard Beck.
Troy, I'm doing well, man. Hope you're doing well as well. Thank you for the very kind introduction. I hope I'm not blushing too much here.
Hey, listen. If you're blushing, that only means that the intro was as legendary as I expected it to be. So that's exactly what I wanted. But again, thank you so much for being on the show. I really do appreciate it. So many people have asked, about different special guests to have on. And, people always ask me why I bring on certain people. When I bring on certain people, especially like, for instance, you or Bagley or other people like that, it's people who I grew up reading, watching, people that I've covered, inspirations to me. And you, by far, legend in the game. We're talking about 27 years. You guys can see his @ on screen, @Howard Beck. Please do yourself a favor and follow him. His last article on The Ringer, you can see it was written there, the NBA's free agency apocalypse. I want to say, apocalypse is not here. You can also catch him, again, every Monday on the Real Ones podcast. For the Ringer show. And again, one of the main things he was talking about in the article, he did mention the Mikal Bridges trade in there. If you do want to mention anything or read anything about the Knicks, he covers everything in that article as well, too, something to look at. But one thing we were talking about off air, Howard, and something I want to get to, all of your years of covering the NBA, we're going to get to the Knicks stuff, guys. I know you guys are, heavy with that. And like I said before, we're going to get there. But I want to talk about something that only really you can answer. 27 years covering the league. You've seen the ups and downs and everything. But something that doesn't really get asked about is the way the league is covered now. Because I feel like the way that journalism is even nowadays has shifted from, say 1997 to 2024, right? So just in your opinion, can you speak a little bit about how the league has changed from a journalistic point of view?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I could do 3 hours on this. We don't have 3 hours. Your followers and viewers don't want to listen to me rambling for 3 hours about the state of sports journalism. Or its evolution over the last 27 years. However, I will give you the short version. Short version, I mean, first of all, the fact that you and I are doing this, right? Like this platform, this means of even talking about the league, reporting on the league did not exist when I started covering the Lakers in 97 for the LA Daily News, right? I was a, lifetime newspaper guy. I thought I would spend my entire life in newspapers, just, an anonymous face behind the byline, right? I was not doing... There was no video to do. There were no podcasts. There was no Twitter. There was no social media. The internet existed, but it was not nearly as extensive. So for most of us who came up at a certain time, like you thought, all right, this is the job. For most of us, I'm a reporter. I'm a writer, beat writer covering the Lakers back then, and eventually the Knicks for the New York Times. And I could have done that my whole career and been perfectly happy with it, I think. But the landscape has changed dramatically. Our world has changed dramatically, and at one point in time, I would have thought it was a joke. Like if you had said, like, "Oh, one day you'll be, doing like all this other stuff. You'll basically be like a broadcaster, right?" And because I never saw myself as a TV person. The fact that I do video, podcasting, radio, everything else, as extensively as I've done, especially for the last 10 years, 11 years since leaving the Times. Not something I ever could have imagined. So there's that part of it. Twitter has changed our jobs in so many ways. The way the NBA is reported on has changed dramatically. Not all for the best, by the way. But I would say that the media ecosystem in 2024, it's broader, it's deeper, it's more diverse, it's more interesting, nuanced. Like every single niche you want. If you're just obsessed with salary cap minutia, there are a bunch of people out there writing really smartly about the salary cap, way beyond what I even understand about it at this stage because it's gotten very complicated. If you're just if you want to get into the granular details of the X's and O's, of the analytics, of sports science, of anything, like all that coverage exists now, and in a purely newspaper environment, or I should say like newspaper, TV, radio, right? Just the traditional kind of like triad of media coverage back in the day, everything was more generalized because you had to appeal to the broadest audience. So there's no possibility of having somebody who specialized just in X's and O's or just in analytics or just in salary cap stuff. And so the positive part of it is that no matter how you consume the NBA, no matter what kind of fan you are, casual, hardcore, whatever little sub interests you may have, all of it's out there. And if it's not, you can create it yourself and be that, create that niche and carve out a part of the market. That's the good news. The bad news is like, the media landscape is just really volatile. You've seen some movement in our ranks recently on the NBA. There's other stuff going on at various other platforms right now. Not for me to discuss, but like, there's just a lot of movement and volatility. I mean, listen, obviously, I'm at the Ringer. I'm very, very happy, thrilled to be there for the last year. It's coming up on my 1 year anniversary.
Congrats, man.
But thank you. But it was, little rocky ending at Sports Illustrated where they, laid us all off, and it was a rocky ending at Bleacher Report where they laid us all off. So there's the shortest version I can come up with of the media landscape question.
But see, that's the thing, though. That's the insight that we can't get. I can't get that anywhere else. The only person who could really answer that question is you and anybody else who has about 27 plus experience years doing this. And by the way, that list is very, very short. So again, legend in the game. I want to say thank you again. For anybody who's listening or watching, I've said this to him personally, but I want to say it on air as well, too. Inspiration to me, the reason that I'm doing what I'm doing right now is because way back when I was a Knicks fan and I used to go scour Bleacher Report reports or go on Knick News and try to look for the New York Times, I would read Howard Beck. I would read the New York Knicks stuff he would write, and that would get me inspired to be more of a fan. So things like that help people as we are today. So again, I just wanted to say thank you so much for that. And I also want to go to our next topic because, again, everybody wants to talk about the Knicks right now. And really, because the Knicks are at contender status, I feel like they're trying to find other things to talk about. We're going to get into why things are spoken about in the first place. But really, the conversation had to start with updates on Julius Randle and that contract extension with the Knicks. Now, as you know, Howard, with Julius Randle, he was eligible for a contract extension with the Knicks starting August 1st. I believe it's 4 years, $181 million. And according to Bobby Marks, the market plays a huge role in terms of what determines a player's salary. He's a player that's had a surgery the last 2 years, with the most recent one being a serious shoulder injury that cost him the year since January. And when talking about free agency, Bobby Marks put it out there stating, who is New York competing against out there in the offseason? Is Brooklyn willing to spend $40 million on Randle? Are the Wizards or other teams going to do that? It's just not there. It's either going to be New York on an extension, a new contract, or maybe he goes a Josh Hart route where he goes into the deal before October 31st and extends off of that. Basically stating, though, Randle likely is going to extend. So the question really was if it's not really if, it's when he's going to extend, but not really sure when it's going to happen. It's a multifaceted question here. Before I get to each and every part, let me get to the first part for you. Do you think that Julius Randle will sign that extension with New York based on everything that you're hearing?
I don't have a prediction for you there that I could make confidently. My gut tells me that they'll figure something out, that it's to everybody's benefit to kind of get this done and put away, because you don't want it hanging over, right? This is part of the dynamics in the NBA. Like you could say about, like, we could discuss it through the lens of like, what's a guy worth? How much do you think you should spend on him just payroll wise? How much room do you have? All this stuff, right? What does he bring to the table? Sometimes it's just a matter of like, just, human psychology. Like if he wants to be rewarded, right? He's been all NBA twice. He has been a critical part of this era, the best era they've had in 20 something years. And he should be rewarded for that. And if you're Julius Randle or his agent and his family and everybody else, that's, hey, look, max me out. What's the hesitation? But the NBA is in a different place right now in terms of the economics, the new CBA, the second apron, all these complications. And so it's not that straightforward for the Knicks. And the factors that Bobby Marks outlined are the right ones, of course, to look at. because there's a market here. And if you're the Knicks, it's delicate, right? You don't want to go to Julius Randle and his representation and say, listen, who else you could sign? Like you don't say it. Bobby Marks could say that. You and I could say that. You can't say that in a negotiation. You're not saying like, oh, hey, it's us or nothing. Where are you going to go? The Nets and the Wizards aren't signing you. And I think that Bobby's right on all of that, of course. So it's delicate because you don't want to go into the season with one of your best players feeling, been out of shape. You want him to feel part of this. You want him to feel invested. He probably already, like, it would just be, this is just me talking, like, but it would be shocking if he didn't feel a little bit already about, well, listen, they've just brought in another guy who's, an offensive go-to guy in some respects, and Mikal Bridges, different kind of player, but still, they've brought another guy. They've got all these other players who emerged last season who have become stars of various levels. OG Anunoby just got a massive contract after they acquired him, and they had a certain run of success while Julius was hurt. So you're probably already feeling like just a little bit of insecurity. And so again, the psychology of this is important. I don't think you want that hanging over. So if they can find a way to get something done, maybe it's a shorter extension, maybe it's max number, but shorter years. Maybe it's below the max, but longer. I don't know. Maybe they find some kind of compromise just to show, look, we want you, we value you, and we want him to feel good about things going into the season so that you don't have it hanging over. But it's also not going to shock me if nothing gets done at all, because I do think Julius Randle in a vacuum, of course he should want and has earned a full max extension. And I don't know that it's wise for the Knicks to do it. I also don't think I'm not sure it's feasible, right? We don't need to get into all the mechanics of the salary cap and second aprons and everything, but they've got 4 players making 20 plus million a year, or 20 plus million just this season. Next season, they'll have 3 guys making at least 30 or more million for a single year. And Bridges is also eligible for an extension, and you just gave up like a shit ton of draft picks. So like you didn't trade all that stuff for Mikal Bridges just to like have him expire in a couple of years. Like, and he's eligible for an extension too. You can't pay everyone in different other eras of the NBA, different CBAs. Maybe you can afford to just keep spending. This CBA is designed to prevent, especially a team like the Knicks with all the resources they have, from just spending to the hilt. They can, like, it's possible. There still is not literally a hard cap, but there are consequences for being over that second apron.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the Knicks want to do that. If they extend Julius at the max, maybe they're saying, screw it. Let's just take the consequences.
Right. And the thing is, everything's pointing to the fact that they're not going to sign that extension. You would figure with Jalen Brunson doing what he did, right, giving the Knicks this massive discount, all this flexibility, just thinking about how they would use it, just filling in the use of it with Julius Randle's contract right now, doesn't seem like it would make sense. And even for Randle, just thinking about it outside the box here, if I'm him and I'm thinking to myself, in order for me to get the most money, I got to show, not number one, I'm back, I can do it, and I can prove it where it matters the most in the postseason. I think if I did that, it'd probably maximize the amount of money that I would get. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think that there's a good case to be made for the wait and see approach on both sides, right? Julius, show you're healthy. The Knicks are, I think, certainly going to want to see too just how this team fits together now. Like, Randle and OG were not together for very long before before the injuries hit. Bridges is brand new to the team. The team just evolved over the course of last season, and now obviously, we'll get to the center issues, but Hartenstein is gone, and so even though the core of this team is back and you could feel very comfortable about what their identity is, there are still some things to work out. What is the pecking order now in the offense with Brunson and Randle and Bridges and Anunoby, who's going to want, he's not a go-to offensive player necessarily, but, well, first of all, every NBA player thinks they're a go-to offensive player, but Anunoby's going to want to get his too.
Yeah.
So, Tibbs has his work cut out for him in terms of figuring out the rotation, making sure that everybody feels good about their role. We know that Randle has chafed in the past sometimes about role and shots and everything. So I think there's a good case to be made that if you can't figure out terms on an extension, can't come to terms, play it out. see how all these pieces fit together, see if you really do think that Randle is a long-term piece. Maybe he's not. Maybe you decide that you should flip him for a more reliable center, given all of Mitchell Robinson's health concerns over the years and given the loss of Hartenstein. So I could see a playing it out scenario. Randle does have that $31 million option for next season.
Mm-hmm.
It's, if you take it as Bobby Marks laid it out, if you take it as a given that it's unlikely that anybody's going to scoop him up in free agency or max him out next summer, and that's an inducement for Randle to just opt in, then you've got time as the Knicks to figure this out.
What do you think about the fit with Julius Randle? That's been the next biggest question, because now you have all these pieces. You have all the things that matter that could take you to the championship. Do you think Randle's fit is something to be questioned? Because he did mention on offense, potentially maybe there is a question of where he could be in that pecking order.
I mean, it's interesting because I think at the time that Brunson arrived, Randle was the clear number one option in some ways, right? Like, this is the most skilled and accomplished offensive player you've got. And then Jalen Brunson turned into an MVP candidate. So there's that aspect of it. There's the bringing in Mikal Bridges part of it. There's the fact that Dante DiVincenzo just had a career season. You have so many different ways you can go with the offense now that when you ask about what's the fit, I think it's unknown. I literally, we have not seen any extensive version we haven't seen any version with Bridges in it. But if we assume that the starting five is Brunson, Bridges, Anunoby, Randle, Mitchell Robinson, that unit hasn't even played together yet. So how do the shots get divided up? How much opportunity does Randle get to cook? We know he likes to hold the ball a little bit too long sometimes. How much is Bridges? I'm curious to see how much Bridges is playing as purely with the starting unit versus I've thrown this out there, and it's a bad analogy, or not a just not a perfect analogy, but I've wondered if Bridges could serve a little bit as like the Andre Iguodala with the Warriors role, where you're running the second unit. Like, Bridges can play that role. You don't want him to be your primary playmaker, your offensive hub full time. We saw in Brooklyn that's not really the best use of him. Right. He's better as your second, third option, but he has ball handling and shot creation skills. There are things he can do. And I wonder if part of the way you resolve the just pure distribution of field goal attempts is that maybe Bridges comes out early, returns with the second unit.
Yes.
I don't know. We'll see. Like I said, Tibbs is much better at this than I am, so I'm sure he'll figure it out. But I do think those are things they do have to figure out.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that DiVincenzo is still getting X number of minutes and shots, because he had a breakout season and he was fantastic. It's they are one of the deepest teams in the league now, which is to their credit, but of course that can pose challenges too. And so when you ask about Randle's fit, I think all of those things come into play.
One of the things that we're talking about as well too, right? We're talking about Julius Randle, his fit, which is great and all, and we could talk about that. And I think that over the course of the season, I think he'll make it work. If January was any indication, I know it was a very small sample size, it looked like he was playing within the flow of the offense, not forcing anything. If he can continue that and not really care if he's a number one some nights, number two some nights, and number three some nights, I think the Knicks are going to thrive. It's all about, like you said, the mentality, how you approach, that part of the game. The other part that the Knicks have been trying to achieve ever since the offseason when they made the Mikal Bridges deal is really the upgrade at the center position. And when we're talking about centers, is really the Knicks trade targets for next season, pretty much the deadline. We know the names going at some point in time had been Walker Kessler. We know Jonas Valanciunas had potentially been mentioned. There have been a couple other names. Jalen Duren from Detroit obviously has been mentioned. So a lot of different targets with the Knicks, because obviously the goal is to get another center, which basically tells me that the depth that they have right now at center, they don't really feel comfortable with, because why else would you look all offseason for a center, currently still be rumored to try to get a center, and then now even going into the deadline, you have Precious Achiuwa, $6 million, 1 year, no trade clause, obviously look like he's going to be traded along with somebody else for another piece. But really, just the question for you is, what are you hearing around the league with the Knicks regarding trade targets and anybody they could potentially be looking at the deadline?
I mean, I think you named the most obvious ones. I don't know if DeAndre Ayton makes much sense given, salary there, but, Robert Williams III, if he's healthy, is he a possibility? You talked about Walker Kessler, but they've also got John Collins in Utah. Are one or both of those guys available? I don't think Vooch makes sense, assuming that Chicago moves on from him at some point. He's not. I don't think he's the right brand of center, and again, expensive. So you scan the league for centers who you think could be on the move at some point or be available, and there's not a ton of options. Valanciunas seems like the most likely one, and he's on a very reasonable contract. And I think the Wizards signed him purely for the purpose of saying, let's use our cap room, get to the salary floor, and have a guy who, he's not going to be part of their long-term plans, but he's an asset they can move later. But if Valanciunas, and he's not eligible for trade until December 15th because of signing the offseason deal, right, when he becomes eligible, the Lakers are probably in that chase too, and maybe some others. So it could be tough. It could be tough. Like, I have no doubt in my mind that the Knicks are going to be scouring the market for another center. But it doesn't mean they're going to be able to find one during the season. I think it's going to be challenging. And, again, usual concerns, payroll concerns, trying to find the right trade. They do have, look, they've got plenty of pieces to move. They got a lot of guys on reasonable contracts. They've still got draft picks to work with. So they're very well positioned. But there's a scenario where they go through the season with the roster that we see right now, and hope that Mitchell Robinson can stay healthy, and that Precious Achiuwa could give you some good backup minutes, and that you do a significant amount of Randle or OG at the 5.
So that's the other thing with the Randle and OG at the 5. My concern, however, with that is that I've watched Tom Thibodeau for years, and I know he doesn't really do anything unless he's forced in a situation to really do it. Given the roster that he has right now, do you see a potential for him actually going small with Randle or OG playing some minutes at the 5?
I mean, I almost think it's by definition like he has to, right? Like the only, aside from Mitchell Robinson, the only guy who's even 6'10" or over who might play is Jericho Sims, and I don't think Jericho Sims is really going to play. So now it's everybody is 6'8" and under. This is entirely after Mitchell Robinson. Everybody else who's a solid rotation player is 6'8" or under. So by definition, they're going to go small. Whether Tibbs likes it or not, wants it or not, I don't really think there's a choice. So, and the thing is, look, you lose maybe some pure rim protection, and just, size, height, reach, all that. But you've got so many, long, strong, versatile, switchable defenders on the perimeter that, there are other ways to, slow teams' offenses down, right? Having somebody who can erase everything at the rim is nice, or deter guys from getting there. If you could just lock up the perimeter and they don't get there in the first place, that's another way to go. But I do think it's a concern. I'm not minimizing it at all. I think just having Mitchell Robinson is a concern, partially because of his health, and partially just because, look, foul trouble, everything else that we know about Mitchell Robinson's history to date. Losing Hartenstein was a big deal. I've said this elsewhere over the course of the summer. I'm not positive, and it wasn't a direct swap, right? It's not like they decided to trade Hartenstein for Bridges. These were two completely different transactions for different reasons. But the net sum of their offseason was they lost their starting center and they gained a really versatile wing. I don't know if it actually moved them forward. If they'd gotten Bridges and had been able to keep Hartenstein, they're absolutely better than they were last season. Now I think that whatever improvement comes, it's mostly because they've got a full season of this whole group, which again hadn't played together a full season yet because of injuries and because of getting OG and Anunoby, last season. So, but I don't know for sure that they're substantially better, because I think they've lost a significant amount in losing Hartenstein, and it's just not easy to replace.
No, it's really not. And, I think that it's a fair assessment to say that the Knicks might be a little bit worse given the fact that they don't have the starting center anymore. I would say that their roster is more complete in terms of fit with the players that they have. But to your credit, if somebody goes down like a Mitchell Robinson at center, it could really hurt their chances of going at least as far as they want to go during the season. Yeah, go ahead.
And just to be clear, I'm not saying that I'm not sure that they're better means I think they're worse. It just means I think they're different, and it may be you're winning a different way, and maybe you're about the same, right? I'm not saying they're regressing, but they're going to have to win a different way without having Hartenstein and his offensive rebounding and all the second possessions he was creating, his passing abilities from that position, just his size and strength. I mean, it's they're losing a lot there, but they're gaining a lot in Bridges. So they might just be winning in a different way. So I think that's the best way to put it. And I will get to expectations for the season, but actually I have a well, we'll get to that.
I do want
Getting
to.
ahead of myself.
I do want to ask though, because we were talking about the roster, obviously, right? We still see the Knicks having that final roster spot still available. They still have access to the MLE taxpayer mid-level exception. Obviously, they don't have to use it now. They could sign somebody in camp if they want to. They could wait to use that at the buyout market in February or March if they would like to do that as well too. What do you think the Knicks are doing with that final roster spot? What do you see them doing given the current state of their roster? Because you did mention potentially that you do maybe see this team as the roster that they go forward with for the rest of the year.
You leave yourself in this, in today's NBA with all the restrictions and all the consequences of second apers and everything else, you need to leave yourself some wiggle room. They've left themselves some wiggle room. So if somebody is worthwhile comes available via the buyout market, cool. They've got $7 million or so of wiggle room under the second apron. But the other reason you leave a roster spot open is so you can do a 2-for-1 trade, right? So if you're bringing in 2 and sending out 1, you can make that trade without having to waive somebody. So you've just left yourself flexibility. And it's not like there's anybody out there right now who you could sign who's going to make the rotation. The rotation is stacked as it is, as we've been talking about. So I don't know that there's any real good answer for that 15th spot and MLE pieces or whatever. Like it's just kind of a wait and see thing. They're leaving themselves the option if something comes available.
I think that makes the most sense as well, too, because given where they are right now, I mean, you could use it for somebody and potentially not play that person if something else goes out, right? If Mitchell Robinson ends up playing more than you expect, and then you make the trade anyways at the deadline, you may have wasted that money in that spot. So it's a very good point. I don't know what the Knicks are going to do, but it does look like, given that they haven't really done anything on the market as of yet, they tried to work out other people, but nothing is really stuck. I don't necessarily see them using the MLE as of yet. They might do exactly what you said and kind of have a wait and see approach. My final question for you before we get to the fan questions is, and I think this is kind of what you were waiting for, the how far can a fully Knicks team go this year with the current roster that they have?
Yeah, I mean, listen, at this time of year, you always defer to the defending champs unless they've lost significant players, right? So the Boston Celtics are and deserve to be the favorites, not just in the East, but in the NBA favorites to repeat. But we also know that in this era, nobody repeats anymore.
Yeah.
Something always happens. So let's take it as a given that the Celtics are the worthy favorites to repeat. Let's take it as a given that the top of the East has gotten a heck of a lot more competitive. There's a lot of really good teams. But one, the Knicks are absolutely a contender. Things have to break their way. Maybe they have to break against the Celtics, right? And against the Sixers and the Bucks and some others. But they're absolutely a contender. It would not be a shock to anybody in the league if the Knicks were in the Eastern Conference Finals or in the NBA Finals next spring. They've got the depth, they've got the talent, and as great as the Celtics were last season, I don't think they're a juggernaut. That's not a knock. Like they're really good and they're deep and they're talented, but Porzingis is going to miss a couple months to start the season. Horford is, I think, 73 years old. I need to look it up. I love Al Horford. Al Horford's awesome. But they have concerns there at center themselves. Yeah. And look, they've had an interesting offseason where, was Tatum disrespected because of the Olympics? Was Jaylen Brown disrespected because he didn't get on the Olympic team? Like, are those things that are going to fuel them next season, or are those things that are going to somehow, be, a distraction somehow? I don't know. Something always happens in this league. But the one thing I will say is this, and this is not contradicting what I said about, I'm not sure they got better by losing Hartenstein and gaining Bridges. They're going to have to win differently, but they're going to have presumably health, willing, a full season of a different kind of team, but one with an incredible amount of talent and great depth. You take that combined with the fact that the Sixers have to figure out a new pecking order here, right? They got to incorporate Paul George. They got to see how that's all going to work out. Paul George and Joel Embiid always have some injury issues. So there's going to be some asterisks or qualifiers or concerns for the Sixers. I think the Milwaukee Bucks had a pretty good offseason, but the Bucks, age has been an issue for them ever since they won the championship. They have injury concerns. Chris Middleton gets hurt every year. Brook Lopez, is got a lot of miles on him. So yes, I think the Bucks are a contender. I think the Sixers are a contender. but there are potential concerns there. I'm not sold on the Cavs. I don't think it's time to talk about the Magic and the Pacers yet in terms of that top tier. There's 4 to 5 teams at the top of the East, and the Knicks have as good a shot as anybody, I think. And in the regular season, this is what I was leading to. I think the Knicks are going to win the regular season in the East because defending champions tend to, slide back just a little bit, right? And it's not necessarily, that it's not apathy or whatever. It's just it's tiring. You go on a long run, it's tiring. A bunch of their guys were in the Olympics. You're not usually the 73 win Warriors team was one of the most incredible outliers to this that I've ever seen in my career. Because defending champs, usually you come back the next season, there's a little bit of a championship hangover. You don't feel as the same urgency to be the top seed because you're the defending champs. What are you worried? Are you worried about winning a game 7 or some other critical road game in the playoffs? No, you already know it. You're the defending champs. You have all the confidence in the world. So the Celtics are not going to go pedal to the metal the whole season. The Sixers and Bucks we've covered, like they've got all their concerns. But what do we know about Tom Thibodeau? He treats every single game like the fate of the universe depends on it. So we know the Knicks are going to try to win every regular season game. We know they're never letting up. And you take that combined with their talent level, their depth level, and the qualifiers I just mentioned about the other contenders in the East. I don't think it's crazy at all to think that the Knicks are the top seed in the East. It doesn't mean I'm predicting them to go to the finals or even the conference finals. Things happen, upsets happen, injuries happen, whatever. But in the regular season alone, I think there's a very clear and not at all crazy, path there to be the top seed. Everybody else has a lot else to work through. But the Knicks could certainly do it.
So according to Kendrick Perkins, he stated that the Knicks are going to have the best record, not just in the East, but they're going to have the best record in the league. Would you agree with that take?
Best record in the East, like I say, I think is absolutely on the table. It wouldn't shock me in the least. Best record in the league means they're going to have to be better than Oklahoma also. And I think the Thunder are going to be really freaking good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, possible. I was not aware of Perk making that claim. But I don't think it's that big of a stretch. It might be a little bit of a stretch, but I'm like,
he did call it a bold take. So I will give him a little bit of credit. He didn't say it. He said bold take.
We're in mid-September. Everybody's had to talk about the offseason for like 2 months now. We still have a couple weeks until training camps. Like at a certain point, you just got to come up with something. So
listen, I hear you. Thank you, Howard. You've been so great. I know we're a little bit above time here. We had a lot of people in the chat looking to ask you some questions. Do you have a little bit of time? Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much. Let's see what we have here. So got a lot of questions over here for you. And guys, if you have any more questions, please make sure you ask them right now. We have a few minutes where we can get to them. Let's see here. So one person says, Tony Riviera, who's a member of the channel. Thank you so much for being a member, Tony. He says, Dolan loves Randle. He's definitely not going anywhere. What do you think about the relationship between, because there has been something spoken about the loyalty that Dolan has. And you've seen, obviously the relationship with Steve Mills, the loyalty he showed him and how long he's been with the Knicks. So, I mean, there is a fact to that. What do you say about people who say Randle can never leave the Knicks because he's loved by Leon, the front office, and really James Dolan?
Oh boy. I think so. Never discount whether it's Dolan or any other owner. Never discount that the desires and loyalties, whatever it may be, of an owner can have a massive influence on a team. One of the things that has enabled the Knicks to finally have this renaissance over the last 4 years, is that Dolan has largely stayed out of the way. He has pledged to do that other times, and it never really lasts. I would just say this. If Leon and his staff, and again, it doesn't matter, on a basketball operations level, there's always guys you like, guys you drafted, or guys you traded for, guys you believe in. This is the NBA. It's a business, as they always say. And sometimes you just have to trade somebody. Sometimes you just have to not extend somebody. Sometimes you just have to deal with the the cards as they sit. And again, in this version of the NBA, with a second apron and all these other restrictions and all these consequences for having a massive payroll, you have to make pragmatic, cold-hearted decisions. And if that means parting ways with a guy who you loved as a staff, as at the coaching level, at the front office level, or even the owner, I would hope that if the front office concluded, and these are all hypotheticals, if the front office concluded our best way forward is to not max out Julius Randle because we want to max out Mikal Bridges and we want to make sure we're still taking care of the rest of these guys and we need to leave ourselves flexibility and we don't want to be over the second apron. If they got to that conclusion and went to ownership and said, it's time to trade Julius Randle or let him walk eventually in free agency, I would hope that at this stage, ownership is listening to the front office and their basketball expertise and their salary cap expertise, because meddling from the top has not gone well for them in the past.
I think a lot of people who say that sometimes don't remember the Dolan days where it always used to be a constant interference with everything. And I think we've been so gone from that because it really stopped doing that when Phil Jackson kind of came aboard. I think he kind of stepped away from there. And even since then, he's been way, way more far away from there now, even with Leon Rose. So I definitely agree with that. I think not meddling has helped us get here. So why ruin a good thing, right? So I definitely agree where you're coming here.
But I will also say, and there's a story I wrote in the Ringer back in the spring about this Knicks renaissance and about all the things that they have done right to get here. Mm-hmm. And toward the end of the story, I quote some people, and yes, these are folks are anonymous. It kind of has to be, but these are people with very close ties to the franchise who basically said, yeah, you're always kind of looking over your shoulder, waiting and wondering, when, and it's not saying it's going to happen. It's not an inevitability, but there's always a concern with this franchise, given Dolan's history, that at some point he might meddle again. So, but that's in the story I wrote back in the spring. And yeah, like people who work there or have worked there in recent years, I'll just say this. It's to Dolan's credit that he has not meddled in basketball affairs in the way he once did to their detriment. It doesn't mean that he's not still meddling in a lot of other areas there that fans would never see. I'll just leave it at that.
Wow, now that's an interesting one. I guarantee either myself or somebody else is going to clip that, but I appreciate because that was a great one right there.
Sorry, I was not meaning to give the aggregators fodder. I never want to, but
no, that was real though. I appreciate that. Another question we have, Howard, comes from Paul over here. He says, most realistic trade for a center: who goes out, who comes in? Are there any of the Randle rumored trades from ESPN good fits for the Knicks? I think the ones he was referencing are some. Bobby Marks had him potentially going to Dallas in a move. There are some potential trades that have him going to the Hornets. I believe I read one today that had I believe him going to the I forget who I don't remember. There's so many different trades for Randle. I don't remember the exact ones, but there are a lot of potential trades right now going on about Randle. I think, again, the reason that's happening is because he's not extended. So when you're not extended, it really leads to the other conversation. Go ahead.
But those, right. And to be clear, like those are, if I'm recalling correctly, those are all like just doing the exercise. So these are not like, we need to make a distinction. This stuff gets blurred a lot. Again, you asked at the outset of the show about, the changing media environment. There's so much blurring now, intentionally and unintentionally, of trade rumor versus trade speculation versus, hey, let's just do a pod where we make up a bunch of fake trades and then somehow one of them becomes, trade rumor. Like, no, it's not. Like, I think Bobby and Zach Lowe on Zach's podcast recently were going through possible Randle destinations, and they were having a hard time coming up with anything that really worked. So I think the answer is that, basically. Like, I don't remember what the pieces were that Bobby might have proposed, but I don't think there's any active proposals in reality. This is all just us on the outside speculating. So I don't think it's even worth going down that road right now.
I absolutely agree with you again. And I think, I don't know. I think people just get caught up with that a lot of the times. And I think it's just because it's part of the off-season conversation sometimes. And I think with Julius Randle as well too, if you just read everything that actually is about Randle in New York and everything, you can kind of see those reports and kind of, as I do, kind of negate them because you know they don't really mean anything. You know what it's for. I know it's the offseason, so I know what everything's about at this point. Last question for you before you have to leave is the last one. I promise you. And guys, again, I can't answer all your questions. I can't keep them in for an hour. Okay, it's not my fault. But last one is: do you realistically see us trading for an impactful center before the season starts?
Before the season starts, I think is unlikely.
Me too. Yeah, I agree.
In part because if something could have happened, it probably would have by now on that front.
Agreed.
And what happens after and this year, this was a really interesting offseason in that the vast majority of teams' work on personnel front trades and free agent signings got done super fast. And by the time we even I don't think I'd even gotten on the plane to Summer League yet, and it's felt like everything was already done.
Right.
So we've had a lot of offseason for teams to look at what they've got, look at what they might be missing, and scour the market. If something hasn't happened by now, it's probably not happening on the trade front. And then by just when December 15th hits and all the players who were signed in the offseason become trade eligible, it loosens up the market. So even if you're not targeting somebody who signed a deal and isn't eligible yet, it's just the market itself gets looser because there's just more players in play. More teams feel like they can construct a deal. And if you needed to involve a third team, that kind of stuff. So I don't think anything's happening before opening night. I mean, I could be wrong. I've been wrong before and stuff like this, but it doesn't seem likely. If they're making a move at all, it's sometime between December 15th and the trade deadline.
I absolutely agree with that as well, too. You got to think about the assets they have available to them. You can't even trade Achua till the 15th anyways, and he'd likely be one of the things that they'd want to trade in one of those moves. I can't see them really moving anything. To your point, could it happen? I mean, sure, anything could happen, but I don't see any of those moves happening until they're able to see the roster, see it play out, and then after that, identify potentially a need, as we talked about earlier. Again, guys, I can't keep him forever. This was the amazing, the great, legendary, as I call him, 27 years, guys, writing, covering for the NBA. We're talking about every single team you can think of. Again, he is the great Howard Beck. You can see his ats on screen again every Monday on the NBA show for The Ringer, Real Ones. You can join him there. You can see him as well, too, on theringer.com. He writes so many different articles. Latest one on July 9th, the NBA's free agency apocalypse is not here. Great information there about the Knicks and all of your favorite teams. Again, he doesn't only give you information about the Knicks. Not only that, it's everything else. And that's why he is worth the follow. Please give him a follow. And again, thank you so much, Howard, for being here. It was amazing talking to you today.
My pleasure, Troy. Thanks for all the kind words. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Good to see you.
Of course. Same to you, man. Thank you so much.